Thank you.
Take it away.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you guys coming in. Hope you guys have all had some really good experiences so far at the conference. I know I've been learning a lot myself, and I think that's one of the great parts about what we're doing here today, right, is we're getting together with our peers and having an opportunity to learn. What I'm going to be talking about today is the idea of really building out scalable, repeatable demand gen programs and processes, and how that ultimately allows you to bring back and start building some really, really killer content. So just quick introduction to myself. I am Jeff Soriano. I'm the Senior Director of Demand Gen at Offerpop. Fun fact, my education is in music, so don't trust a word I say today. I know nothing about marketing. Come on, you can laugh a little bit more at that, right? Perfect. Thank you. Now I feel funny. That's good. So a lot of the times I spend talking to my teams, a question comes up whenever they come to me with an idea, a program, a plan, anything. I always ask, is this something that's built to scale? And there's a reason why I ask that question, and it will bring me to the kind of token challenges ahead slide, right, that you've probably seen at a million conferences, you've seen people always talk about. But the reality is, this is an actual thing that we have to deal with every day. So when I talk to these guys about scalability, it goes back to some of these things like, how many people here in the room would say that their budgets have remained pretty much somewhat flat over the last couple of years? Okay? How many of you would say that your headcount numbers have remained pretty flat over the last couple of years? Okay. How many of you would agree that the expectations of what you're supposed to deliver have gone up significantly over the last couple of years? Right? So there's a real question of how do you scale? How do you do this in an effective manner if you're really talking about the fact that you have the same amount of money, the same amount of headcount, the expectations can keep going up, and you need to create more and more content than ever, right? Because there's mobile, there's social, there's PR, there's ebooks, there's your website, there's so many channels. So how do you do this in a scalable fashion? Well, first, let's take a step back and just say, how are we defining scalable? Because this is a bit of a buzzword. So just very quickly for me, the idea here is that you're building a process that can deliver more output over time without additional resources. And I think we all just agreed we're not necessarily getting additional resources, so this definition of scalable starts to make a lot of sense for us. So what you really need is a blueprint. There were no designers hurt in the creation of this presentation. I did this all by myself, so feel free to mock me directly when you look at these slides. We're starting to talk about a blueprint. And why this is really important is because a blueprint is developed by an architect or a structural engineer or somebody who knows that they need to build something that is essentially a framework for how to build something where if you need to make changes, you can make changes. But it's the strong plan, it's the strong process. And if you follow it, you're going to build something that's going to be long-lasting. So there are several different parts. And I hope you guys can see this. I apologize if some of it's a little bit small. There are very key parts to the blueprint. And this is kind of the secret to how I do this stuff over and over again, is you have your foundation, you have your first floor, you have your second floor, and ultimately you have the roof. So we're going to go through each one of these to talk about how this ultimately ties back into actually creating very scalable programs. It starts with the foundation. If you've ever looked at the foundation of your own home, you'll see that it's, maybe 2 feet above the ground. But the reality is it's way deeper than that, right? And it's way deeper than that because the ground around it is supporting it. It's actually getting a lot of support. Your foundation needs support. So for me, the kind of analogy here is going back to you actually need support on your foundation. This isn't necessarily saying you need somebody to pat you on the back and say, good job. It's like you actually need people who are on the same page. This is alignment, and this isn't just alignment with sales. This isn't just alignment with the people in your department. This is alignment from the top all the way down. So it really requires you to get the executive level team bought into this stuff as well. Because if you don't have that alignment, what you end up with is seagulls. Is anybody familiar with this term? It's the idea that you have somebody in the organization who's not aligned. They fly in at the last minute, excuse my language, they crap over everything you do, tell you what needs to be changed, and then they fly away. How many people have seagulls in their organization? Yeah, right? We all have seagulls. So when you work together and you get really strong alignment from everybody on that foundation, you ultimately reduce, if not eliminate, the seagulls in your office. So if we go back and look at this framework or this foundation, what we're starting with is identifying your ideal customer profile. And I'm sure a bunch of you have done this before, but the question again I'd ask to the group is how many people have done their ICP with the executive team? Okay, a couple of hands. That's good. That's very good. Having that buy-in is extremely important. And I think we all kind of know that part of the ideal customer profile is going back and saying, okay, what industries are we serving? What verticals are we serving? Looking at revenue bands to understand, are we serving a small customer, a big customer, a mid-sized customer? Job function, is this a marketing person? This is an IT person? Is this a salesperson? Job level, who are we trying to sell into? But ultimately, I think one of the things that's really important for me is actually looking at the unique characteristics that help you identify who is your ideal customer profile. And with this foundation, you start to be able to have a very strong understanding of who you're building these demand gen programs for. Who are you writing this content for? So if you go back and look at what kind of technology are they using? Where are they spending their budget? What are their business challenges? And one of my favorites is actually something that people don't spend a lot of time on. What are the volume drivers that ultimately tell you they're going to be a good customer? So for example, I used to work at a company called M5. We sold hosted voice over IP business phone systems. And one of the indicators for us that they were going to be a good customer from the perspective of driving up the AOV of the customer was how many phones they actually needed. So how many people actually worked there? Did they have a call center? Did they have an inside sales team? These were volume drivers that helped us understand who was going to be a good customer. And then ultimately, how are we building our demand gen programs and our content to support those people? So that's the first part of your foundation, is your ideal customer profile. Because again, not only does it tell you who you're going after, but it tells you who you're not going after. And it gives you that scalability to not have to start over every time when you're building a new program and saying, who are we focusing this on? It's more like, who in our ICP are we focusing this on? Then you take what you did there and you actually start developing out your messaging framework. This is actually a tool, again, meant to be done with your executive team, where you start to build out a hierarchy of how you're going to talk about all this stuff to your ICP. So it starts with, and this is the easy part, what's the name of your company and what category are you serving, right? So, let's say you're a Marketo. We're serving the marketing automation category. Then a description of what's being offered. Well, we have a marketing automation platform. You start to build these things out, and it's funny what happens, right? You ask this question with the executives in the room, and how many different answers do you get? What is it that we do? What category are we in? How are you as marketers actually supposed to be building programs if everybody's not on the same page about this? And then ultimately, what's the business impact that you're delivering to people? So what are your customers actually getting out of your platform? So when you start to, again, create those demand gen programs, you start to create your content, you're building all this stuff out, you know exactly, and everybody agrees upon what the business impacts that you can deliver are. So whether they come in off of an ebook and then they talk to a salesperson and ultimately onto customer success, they understand that these are the agreed upon impacts that you're delivering. And how do you do it? This is what allows you to understand, okay, great, we're able to increase the engagement that a customer gets with your brand. Well, how do you do it? And what is it used to do? Great, so you got more time. What is it ultimately meant to deliver? What are the use cases that people have? All of this stuff starts to turn into the information that drives the ability to create your demand gen programs? And what are your differentiators? If somebody else is doing the same use case, they have the same use case, how are you doing it differently? Which all then comes into the messaging matrix. So everything that you just did from writing out a bunch of words, you now start to turn into sentences. And as you start to go through this, again, this is not easy. How many people have worked with your organization to create an elevator pitch? How many of you feel like you did that first exercise that I just showed, where we were going through the framework before you did your elevator pitch? Good. You had an idea of what the elevator pitch was supposed to be about. So many times you sit in time and you start to figure out, like, okay, what is my elevator pitch? And nobody says, like, well, what are our differentiators? What are the impacts that we deliver? What are we trying to do? It's a sequence of events that allows you to build the foundation for all of this stuff. Again, ask people within your organization to give a description of what you do, and I bet you get a lot of different answers. If you build one of these messaging matrices with your executive team, you start to greatly reduce the variables that are going on. It makes all of your messaging and all of your programs significantly more scalable because there's consistency across all of them. Again, it's good to understand who you're doing this for. This is your target customers. And ultimately, what are their compelling reasons to buy? This is one that I think not a lot of people spend a lot of time on. Like, we all think we have the greatest solution of all time, but what's the compelling reason for someone to actually purchase something from you? And what does your technology actually have the ability to do? Right? What is it that you're actually doing? And what are the key benefits to your customers? And how is that different from what other people are doing? So again, if you go back and look at the messaging framework, you start to really map this stuff out, and then you move it through into the messaging matrix. So your ideal customer profile, your messaging framework, your messaging matrix, that starts to become the foundation of your home. Once you have the foundation built, then it's time to start to take it to that next level. So this is your sales framework. This is one that, again, I feel like as marketers, it is our role to service the sales organization, right? And like, as crazy as it sounds, I actually tell my team all the time, one of the goals that we have as a company, or excuse me, one of the goals we have as a department is for sales to perceive us as valuable. How many people would say that their sales teams perceive their marketing departments as valuable? Good, I'm seeing some hands, right? Like, that's great, right? That's an amazing feeling to feel valuable. So how do you do that? How do you actually achieve that and then ultimately create programs? Well, it's a trust thing. And that means you need to be part of the sales framework conversation. So what I do with my team is I say to all of them, especially the guys who are running a lot of the demand gen stuff, a lot of the people who are writing the content, you need to go back and look at our sales cycle, sit down with the sales team, and start to understand the stages of the sales cycle. What are the desired outcomes of each stage? What are the entry criteria to get into that stage? What are the exit criteria to actually move to the next stage? Like, these are important things for people to understand. So if you talk about having a goal around sales acceleration, how can you possibly support sales acceleration in the sales team if you haven't built out a framework or an understanding of what the entry and exit criteria are for each one of these stages? So if you think about that and really go back and then say, what are the key activities that are happening there? What are we actually doing at this stage? What are the key challenges that exist? What are the recurring themes? What keeps coming up over and over and over again? What are the unique challenges at this stage? What are we only hearing come up at this stage that we don't have coming up at other stages? And who are the stakeholders at this stage? I heard earlier, I think this was on Monday on one of the breakout groups, that they were saying that now the buying committee is made up of 43% of that buying committee is millennials. That's interesting, right? And think about that for a perspective. how does that change potentially what you would say at each one of these stages, depending on who the stakeholders are and who you're talking to and how you need to approach it? So if you start to think about that and who the persona is that you're talking to, and you tie this back to the messaging framework and the messaging matrix and the ICP, it all starts to build upon itself to the point where you have a really solid foundation and understanding of how do I build demand gen programs that can scale? Because every time you're creating something, you're not starting over. You have this entire framework to go back and say, all right, what are the unique challenges here? We just went back and looked at our funnel, and we're having a hard time moving people from MQL to SQL, or SQL to SQL, or whatever the stages are where you're hitting a rut. You can go back and say, well, we understand that that stage actually aligns to stage 2 of the sales cycle, and therefore, we understand that the unique challenges are X, Y, and Z. The fact that my content marketing manager can talk to a sales rep about this stuff builds unbelievable trust, an unbelievable alignment that these guys know just about as much about sales as the sales reps do. And because that trust is there and because that alignment is there, we're not constantly having meetings to talk about whether this person understands the process or not. So it allows you to scale. Like we said at the beginning, budgets are flat. We're looking at team count being flat. So how do you make them more efficient? It's through doing all of this. So, like I said, each person on my team has to go through 5 calls every single month. They fill out one of these, and we see what everybody's coming back with, and then we compile all of the answers together, and it becomes a document for us to use as a resource. Then you take this, and you build the second story of your house, which is the buyer journey framework. So this is going back and saying, okay, we just thought about everything from an internal perspective. Now, everything we learned, let's flip it around and let's look at it from the perspective of the buyer. What is the mentality of the buyer? What is the behavior of the buyer? How does that tie back into the programs that we need to build? So we actually filled this out recently by looking at what we were doing as we were evaluating other technology platforms. So it just so happens that I market into marketers, so we thought this would be a really valid exercise for us. Let's go back and talk about what's happening at each of these stages. What we thought was really interesting was in the not in market stage, you're really just kind of observing educational trends, you're tracking peer activities, you haven't even established that something's a priority yet, you might not even be aware of something. We found that this stage aligns to, as we did more research, probably 70% of the content and programs that we were running. We were creating so much content for not in market that once we got them in on that really amazing ebook, things just fell apart. Like, why couldn't we move them through the funnel? I don't understand. That ebook was amazing. Like, what happened? I don't understand. And it came back to the fact that we weren't thinking about the next stage and how that aligned to the sales cycle and how it aligned to the behaviors and mentality of the people. So by having, again, this document in place, we started to say, okay, how do we do this every time? Rather than starting at the beginning, let's say, where's our problem? Where do we need to focus? Let's build some demand gen programs that are focused on solving this problem right now. So once you determine where things are falling apart, then it's time to break it into the micro questions, right? So we were just saying, for example, this is looking at not in market. Someone is observing technology trends. They're tracking competitive activity. They're monitoring customer opinions. What are the questions that they're asking? Fill this out and say, well, what are the answers that we're going to provide them? And then you can actually do that and say, well, how is that different between when we're serving the retail vertical versus maybe the CPG vertical versus maybe the fintech vertical versus media and entertainment, or whoever the groups of verticals that you're serving. And again, this gives you the ability to go back and say to yourselves, okay, let's build a demand gen program right now to support this problem that we have. We've identified from looking at the buyer process that we have a gap in moving people from this stage to this stage. Because we've attended all those sales calls, we know that there's this unique challenge that exists at this stage. We need to address that. Well, how should we talk about that? Great, let's go back to the messaging matrix and see exactly how we're differentiated in that space. So can you see how this all starts to build on top of each other? And once this work is done, you have a very scalable program because you can quickly react to this stuff. You can quickly change. If you think about the analogy I made in the beginning about like the architect or the structural engineer or the designer who's coming in, you're building something and all of a sudden you say, you know what, we actually don't want the bathroom over there. We want it over here because we discovered that there was a new challenge with the way we originally thought about it. They're able to go, that's fine. I built a plan that allows us to just move things around very quickly. You identified a different need. Now we're just going to move it over here. These are the 3 things we need to do. It's the idea of building a blueprint that allows you to do all of that. So once you get past the micro questions, and you've gone through, again, looking at all of these different stages, and you've tied it back to all of the other work you've done, now it's time to actually put the roof on the house. So this is the theme. This is the theme framework. I've often referred this as the umbrella theme for your company. This should be something big, right? It should actually exist even if your company didn't exist. So to give you an example of what I'm talking about, at Offerpop, we are selling into retail customers, we're selling into CPG companies, media and entertainment, hospitality, travel. One thing that continues to change for those guys and continues to be a challenge is the buyer journey. What does the buyer journey look like for their customers, right? It used to be the idea that you ran a commercial on TV. People saw that commercial. They were interested in the product. They went to the store. The store clerk knew everything that they needed to know. They purchased the product. Then they said, do you like the product? Yes, great, they're loyal. That's completely changed with the mobile device, the social networks that we have. There's so much changing going on. So what we recognized was that we had a theme, an umbrella theme that sat on top of every challenge across all of our verticals that was tied back to the consumer journey. If Offerpop didn't exist, the consumer journey problems that they had still would. So by coming up with a theme that sits on top of all of this, you're able to, again, have a very scalable program. Because when you build your umbrella theme, what you start to do is you go back and start to say to yourself, okay, why is this important? And again, I think we've all probably been through the why, what, how exercises. But when you start to do this with your umbrella theme, it starts to get a little bit different because you're somewhat removed from the conversation. And if you can't develop a really strong why, what, and how for your umbrella theme, it's probably not the right theme. So take some time to go through this exercise and say to yourself, okay, have we found what we think the appropriate theme really is? Do the why, do the what, do the how. Once you actually get to that point and you're like, okay, I now have something that we can work with here, then start doing it with sub-themes. Start breaking this out. So again, if I'll use Offerpop as an example, we talked about the customer journey and how we're actually helping these brands and these companies serve people better throughout the entire customer journey, all the way from awareness to conversions and loyalty. What we started to look at is what are the sub-themes underneath that? So things like, okay, so this is, if we're talking about awareness all the way through to conversions and loyalty, we're actually starting to talk about the convergence of brand and performance marketing. Voila, we have a sub-theme. That sub-theme ties back up to the umbrella theme. Why is the sub-theme important? The what, the how. You start to do this for your different sub-themes, and then you start to do it for your different verticals. You start doing it for the different, the different stages of the buyer journey. And again, you don't have to do this all at once. I'm not saying like you sit down and write all of your content and don't do anything else. But it's the ability to go back again and have this framework and all of that other work that you've done before that gives you the ability to scale. You take this, and then you go back and say, okay, great. Let's look at these themes that we've developed, whether it's your umbrella, whether it's a sub-theme, whatever it is. You'll look at the why and say, okay, maybe the why is going to be our thought leadership, and the thought leadership is really going to support that not in market stage. It's going to talk about a strategic approach. It's going to be focused on business challenges. And we're going to write a white paper, and we're going to support that through some PR, some advertising, put it on our website, put it in some social channels. And this then starts to become the framework for how you go back and actually start to take everything that you've just done and built up to and start to build a content plan. Because think about how killer the content's going to be because you understand all of those other things that you've already went out and built. Because remember, your marketers have attended so many sales calls that they're now really starting to understand the challenges. They understand where somebody is in the buyer journey. They're able to very quickly turn around and say, okay, that's tied back to this theme, that's tied back to this job function within the ICP that has this business challenge at this stage. Just the ability for everybody to have this understanding makes it all very scalable. You can quickly adapt, you can quickly move. Not to mention, by the way, I think it's inevitable that, right, we all have turnover in our companies. When somebody new comes on and you hand them this document and they have the ability to go through the ICP, the messaging framework, the messaging matrix, like go through it, the whole thing, they're like just getting ramped up happens so much more quickly because they're just like, holy cow. This organization has got their acts together. I've never come in my first week in a marketing organization and been given all of this documentation and been told that it started all the way at the C level and worked its way down. I'm glad to hear there's no seagulls here. This is the area where you really get yourself organized and you're setting yourself up for success. So that's it. That's the blueprint. That's how I've been doing this. That's how I've been successful at doing this. It goes back to making sure that you kind of do it in this order, making sure you're very informed. I know we all have a million things going on, and to say that you can just stop everything and do this process, that's a challenge. I get that. But it's really, really important because when you're done with this, again, this is one of these things that I've printed out and sits on everybody's desks. So as they're about to do something, again, if you remember the beginning, I had that question bubble that came out and said, is this plan going to scale? Like they're able to quickly go back and say, yes, it's going to scale because I've aligned it to this and this and this. So for me, that's really what this all comes back to, is the scalability, the repeatability, which ultimately drives effectiveness and gives you the ability to create content that really drives really big results for you guys. So are there any questions? Happy to answer any questions that people might have. Don't be shy. Your question can be, why did your presentation stink? Yes?
In your experience, how long does it take to get through all that foundational stuff? Because I feel like limited who I've worked with, either internally or as clients, everybody's starting at the messaging, the foundation part is not there.
Yeah, so just to repeat the question back for the group, you're asking how long does this whole process take, right? First few steps? So if you can really get internal buy-in, right, and I'm talking about getting a CEO, a CMO, like whoever you think your right committee is, the best way to do this for the ICP and the messaging framework is to really say for 3 days in a row, we're going to be working on this for like 4 hours. So you're talking about looking at like 12 hours in a week that you need commitment from people to knock that out. You want to knock that out, and you don't want it to be something that you think about for like 5 weeks, right? Like it needs to get done. If you just continue to iterate on it, it just gets worse and worse over time. So I've found it's really good to say, hey, everybody, this is an exercise we're doing. It requires this level of commitment. If you're not involved or unable to give that level of commitment, like these are the things that you're not going to be able to do. And I found that managing up to a C-level and saying these are the things you will not be able to do is a really interesting way to do it, but you can knock it out in a week if you get people to commit. Yeah, please.
Those frameworks that you define in your blueprint, how do you marry those up to your data? Third-party owned segmentation?
What happened?
The question is, how do you start to tie that back to your data, right? Your analytics. So let's kind of just go back and look at some of these things. So this is a good way that we actually, I think we all probably have our MGL, MQL, SQL, SQO, all of those different stages of the funnel. We actually have a map, and I probably should have drawn it, I apologize, where those stages actually overlap with these stages. And we go back and look at things like when we started creating content and programs to support the narrowing options part of the buying process, how did we see conversion rates get impacted from MQL to SQL? So we actually start to tie, like it's an overarching, what the buyer process is to our internal sales funnel, and we actually measure it that way. So what impact did having something for motivation actually impact in regards to driving more people through this stage? And we look at it more than just conversion rate. We'll also look at things like sales acceleration. Were we actually able to shorten a sales cycle within a period of time where we were very focused on content for this particular need in that part of the funnel? Yeah.
Do you use personas? And if you do, how are they incorporated into your framework? Because I don't see that in your blueprint.
Yeah, so we don't use personas that much. We use the idea of that kind of regardless of what your job level is, your job function is, we actually think that everyone really has a very similar kind of mental state about things, and the behaviors that they have are very similar. The questions that they have might be slightly different. So if you look back at, oops, going the wrong way, I apologize. If you look at this area right here, we actually sometimes will put a name and title and company size in this when we're doing the micro questions, where we might go back and say, okay, this particular stakeholder, but we don't necessarily do personas as much. We've just found that now we have 70 personas, and we've done a much better job at saying, like, what is the mentality of the stakeholders involved in the buying process at this stage? So we've kind of tried to narrow it down a little bit.
Great. I think that's all we have time for. Jeff will be here afterwards, so you can talk to him off stage.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. Really enjoyed it. And if you guys have questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.